Imagine you're camping alone in the woods, and out of nowhere, an alien crash lands right in front of you. Sounds like a crazy sci-fi movie, right? But what if I told you this story is real? Well, at least it could be, because what happens next will blow your mind. Get ready for a heart-stopping, out-of-this-world love story between a human and a mysterious alien from another galaxy. Trust me, you don't want to miss this. Hit that like button, subscribe, and let's dive into the unexpected. It was a late summer evening when Daniel first saw the light streak across the sky. He was sitting on a large rock at the edge of the forest, the scent of pine needles thick in the cool, night air. The stars were just beginning to peek through the fading twilight, but one star, no, it was too fast to be a star, cut across the sky in a brilliant flash of blue and green. Daniel blinked, almost certain he had imagined it. But then the ground shook, the air hummed, and he felt something in the pit of his stomach, a deep pull to something, someone beyond his understanding. The crash came moments later, a loud, reverberating sound that rattled the very bones of the earth. Daniel jumped to his feet, heart racing. He'd been camping alone for the weekend, looking for solace after a painful breakup. But now his mind was too alive with adrenaline and curiosity to be concerned about isolation. The forest was dense here, old pines towering like ancient sentinels, but he followed the faint trail of smoke through the underbrush, his feet barely making a sound. It wasn't long before he reached a clearing, and there, in the center, lay a strange, silvery object, partially embedded in the ground. It was unlike anything he had ever seen, sleek and alien, but oddly beautiful, as though it had been sculpted by hand, not manufactured. He approached cautiously, his breath catching as he saw a figure inside the vessel, unconscious but still breathing. "Hello," Daniel called out, his voice echoing strangely in the stillness of the woods. The figure stirred, its movements slow, almost sluggish. Then, as if sensing his presence, the alien's eyes snapped open. They weren't human eyes. They were luminous, like pools of liquid light, a strange violet hue that seemed to shimmer and pulse with an energy that Daniel couldn't quite place. The figure, a woman, though he wasn't sure how he knew, had skin that shimmered faintly as though dusted with stardust. Her features were delicate, with high cheekbones and a pointed chin. And though she was humanoid, her proportions were subtly different. Longer limbs, a graceful curvature to her form that felt unnatural, but in the most entrancing way. She looked at him, confusion in her gaze, before her lips parted slightly, her voice coming out in a soft, melodic hum. "You are not of my kind." Daniel stepped back instinctively, heart thumping. She was speaking in a language he didn't understand, but her tone, her expression, those were universal. I'm human," Daniel stammered, his eyes wide, pulse hammering in his ears. Are you all right?" The alien woman blinked, her violet eyes focusing on him with an intensity that made him feel both seen and unknown, all at once. Her body seemed to hum as though vibrating with energy, her fingers twitching like they longed to touch him, or perhaps to explore the environment around her. "I am damaged," she said, her voice thick with an effort to form words. "My vessel is broken." Daniel glanced at the wreckage, then back at her. "Can I help?" he asked, a deep instinct to assist overriding the shock of the situation. She tilted her head slightly, her strange eyes studying him. "You would help?" she asked in disbelief, as though kindness from a creature like him was a foreign concept. "I'm not sure what you need, but I'll try," Daniel replied, his voice softening. He knelt by the side of the ship, trying to gauge how bad the damage was. It looked like something had crashed into the ship, maybe even her. "Can you stand? Can you walk?" She pushed herself up with surprising grace, though her limbs seemed weak and her movements were stiff. She hesitated before placing a hand on the side of the ship for support. "I will be fine," she murmured, although her voice lacked conviction. Daniel couldn't help but watch her, utterly captivated. There was a wild beauty to her, something almost otherworldly. But it wasn't just her appearance. It was the way she moved, the way her presence seemed to fill the space with an energy that hummed in his bones. "Do you have a name?" Daniel asked softly, not sure what else to say. He knew this was ridiculous, but he couldn't help feeling drawn to her, a magnetic pull that was more than curiosity. The alien woman tilted her head again, considering his question. "I do not remember," she said, almost apologetically. "I am not from here." She glanced at the stars above, her expression wistful. "I am lost." Daniel felt his chest tighten at her words, his heart aching for her. He had no idea who or what she was, but he wanted to help. More than that, he didn't want her to feel alone in this strange place. "Well," Daniel said, standing up slowly, "if you're lost, you can stay with me until we figure this out. I know the woods around here, and I can help you get somewhere safe." The woman regarded him, her luminous eyes searching his face, as if weighing his offer. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, she nodded. "I will stay for now." Over the next few days, Daniel did what he could to help her. She didn't need food or water. It was as though her body didn't function the way his did, sustained by something else entirely, but she needed shelter. She needed rest. She needed time to heal. As they spent more time together, Daniel learned small things about her, though the language barrier made communication difficult. She seemed to have no memory of her origin, of the planet she came from, or the people she once knew. Her body radiated a quiet energy, as though she were attuned to something far greater than Earth could offer. She would speak in a language Daniel didn't understand, but the cadence, the tone, became comforting. He found himself learning to recognize certain words, certain gestures. He would sit by the fire with her, both of them staring at the stars, the only sound being the crackling of the fire and the distant calls of nocturnal animals. Sometimes they didn't speak at all. Other times he'd asked her questions, though he wasn't sure if she could understand. "You said you were lost," Daniel said one night, his voice quiet in the dark, his eyes fixed on her glowing form. "Do you want to go home?" She looked at him, and for the first time, something flickered in her eyes, an emotion, deep and raw. "Home," she whispered. I do not remember. I do not know. I'll help you find it," Daniel promised, his voice earnest, though he didn't know how. He only knew that he couldn't bear the thought of her alone in the world, far from whatever place she called home. The nights grew colder, the sky darkening earlier as autumn approached. Daniel found himself thinking about her more than he had about anything in years. He would catch himself watching her, his heart beating a little faster whenever she smiled, though the smile was subtle, fleeting, and rarely directed at him. She seemed unsure of him, hesitant, like a creature unsure whether it should trust a new world, a new presence. But with each passing day, their bond deepened. He showed her how to light a fire with flint, how to fish, how to build a shelter. She, in turn, showed him her strange way of seeing the world, the colors, the patterns that danced around him, the way the air hummed with hidden currents. She would touch his hand, tracing his skin, and sometimes her eyes would soften, and he'd feel a strange warmth suffuse his chest. One evening, as they sat by the fire, her hand resting lightly against his, she turned to him, her gaze unearthly and intense. "I feel something," she said softly, as though surprised by the revelation. Daniel looked down at their hands. "I feel it too," he whispered. "I don't know what it is, but I don't want it to go away." The air between them shifted, and for the first time, the difference between them, human and alien, didn't matter. All that mattered was the connection they shared, the quiet understanding, the bond that had grown between them, undeniable and unspoken. They didn't need words anymore. They didn't need to understand each other in the way they once did. All they needed was this moment. She leaned in slowly, her breath like starlight, and kissed him gently. It was nothing like anything Daniel had ever felt, soft and strange and full of 1,000 things he couldn't explain. It was the taste of the unknown, the touch of the cosmos itself. When they pulled apart, she simply looked at him, her eyes deep and knowing. "We are not from the same worlds," she said, "but for a time, we are together." Daniel nodded, his heart full. For a time, days turned into weeks, and though the alien woman's injuries healed, she seemed more restless. She would sit by the fire at night, her gaze fixed on the horizon, as though listening for something only she could hear. Daniel knew the time was coming when she would have to leave, when the pull of the stars would call her back to whatever faraway place she came from. One night, as they watched the stars together, she turned to him. "I must go," she said, her voice soft but firm. Daniel's heart sank, but he nodded, knowing this moment had always been inevitable. "I'll miss you," he said quietly. "I will miss you too," she replied. "You are more than I imagined." With that, she rose from the fire, her form glowing faintly in the dark. She touched his cheek once more, and the embraces in a soft, tender kiss, and for a long moment after, neither spoke. And then, with one final glance at the human who had changed her life, she stepped into the night, disappearing into the woods, leaving only a whisper of stardust behind. Daniel sat by the fire for a long time after she was gone, staring at the stars that seemed so much more distant now, and yet, for some reason, just a little bit closer. He would never forget the alien he had met, the love that had bloomed between them, fleeting and impossible, but more real than anything he had ever known. In his heart, he knew that some loves were meant to be brief, like a comet passing through the sky, a brilliant, burning light that, for a moment, made everything feel possible. Thanks for watching.